अर्थमित्र गुरुकुलम के एपिसोड नंबर 601। धवल सर, दिस इज अवर 601st एपिसोड। उसमें आप सभी का मैं स्वागत करता हूं। दोस्तों, जैसे कि आप सभी को मालूम है, आज का हमारा सेशन एक स्पेशल सेशन है। सबसे पहले तो मैं दोस्तों मॉर्निंग स्टार के बारे में बता दूं, जिसका शायद परिचय देना एक कोई वो नहीं है, लेकिन फॉर्मेलिटी करनी पड़ेगी। दोस्तों, मॉर्निंग स्टार was established in 1984, जिसका हेडक्वार्टर शिकागो में है। एंड 1984 में जर्नी स्टार्ट करने के बाद करंटली इट इज वर्किंग इन 29 कंट्रीज ऑफ द वर्ल्ड एंड मैनेजिंग मोर देन $244 बिलियन टिल 31st March 2021। मॉर्निंग स्टार की रिसर्च एंड जर्नल रिसर्च के बारे में हम सभी को पता है दोस्तों। All industry, all financial journalism, and all AMCs and everybody using Morningstar's research. So उसके बारे में तो हम सभी वाकिफ हैं। एंड दोस्तों, मॉर्निंगस्टार इंडिया को हेड करते हैं श्री धवल कापड़िया जी, जो कि डायरेक्टर हैं, पोर्टफोलियो स्पेशलिस्ट हैं मॉर्निंगस्टार इंडिया से। He is a bachelor from Mumbai University. He is MBA in finance, CFP, CFA charter holder, and many more. दोस्तों, 2014 में मॉर्निंग स्टार ज्वाइन किया उन्होंने, और वहां से उसके पहले he had served in Axis Bank, where he was responsible for managing his team, portfolio management, and developing the investment portfolios. मॉर्निंगस्टार इंडिया में पोर्टफोलियो मैनेजमेंट का जो भी बिजनेस है, उनकी पूरी जवाबदारी धवल भाई के सर पे रहती है। सो आज का जैसे हमारा सेशन है दोस्तों, मार्केट वॉलिटिलिटी, यूक्रेन वॉर, इन्फ्लेशन राइजिंग, यूएस बॉन्ड यील्ड राइजिंग। सो क्या ये मार्केट नॉर्मल है? हमारा आगे क्या रुख रहना चाहिए? तो उसके बारे में मॉर्निंगस्टार का क्या सोच है, उनके पोर्टफोलियो किस तरह से डिजाइन है, and the way forward. So over to you, Dhaval bhai.
Shukriya Milind bhai. I think thank you for the kind introduction and good evening to everyone. Just a small correction in the introduction. I head the portfolio management business, not overall Morningstar India.
Right.
But that's perfectly fine. So आज जैसे मिलिंद भाई ने कहा, आज हम जो बात करेंगे वो जो भी करंट सिनेरियो है मार्केट्स में, जो हम देख रहे हैं। पहले ऑफ कोर्स पेंडेमिक था, हमें लग रहा था कि अभी पेंडेमिक से हम शायद आगे बढ़ चुके हैं, लेकिन अभी नाउ वी आर फेस्ड विद दिस जियोपॉलिटिकल इवेंट जो अभी भी चल रहा है। ऑफ कोर्स हमें सबको पता है, जो रशिया और यूक्रेन का जो वॉर है वो चल रहा है अभी भी। तो उसके बारे में हम थोड़ा बात करेंगे, और ये बात जरूरी है कि उसका इम्पैक्ट क्या हो सकता है। हम ऑलरेडी ऑफ कोर्स काफी इम्पैक्ट मार्केट्स में देख चुके हैं। फाइनेंशियल मार्केट्स में काफी वोलेटिलिटी चल रही है अभी भी, कमोडिटी प्राइसेस भी ऊपर गए हैं। तो उसके बारे में हम थोड़ा बात करेंगे, और फिर इसका क्या इम्पैक्ट हो सकता है आगे चल के इकोनॉमी पे और इक्विटी मार्केट्स में। एंड इम्पोर्टेंटली एज एन एडवाइजर, हाउ डू यू राइड थ्रू दिस वोलेटिलिटी। आप क्लाइंट के पोर्टफोलियो जो आप मैनेज कर रहे हैं उसको आप हाउ कैन यू sort of do that more effectively, particularly during this period. तो मेरे पास ये एक ब्रीफ प्रेजेंटेशन है जिसकी मैं बात करूंगा अभी, और उसके बाद फिर हम Q&A लेंगे। तो जस्ट अ क्विक रिक्वेस्ट टू एवरीबॉडी, जो आपके क्वेश्चंस है, सवाल है, वो सब आप Q&A टैब में आप डालते जाइए, और एट द एंड ऑफ द प्रेजेंटेशन वी विल Milind bhai and I will try and address your questions as such. Okay, so जस्ट एंड मिलिंद भाई ने ऑलरेडी मॉर्निंग स्टार का इंट्रोडक्शन दे दिया है, तो मैं इसमें ज्यादा टाइम स्पेंड नहीं करूंगा। सिर्फ इतना कहूंगा कि जो हमारा मिशन रहा है फ्रॉम डे वन हैज बीन टू एम्पावर इन्वेस्टर सक्सेस। तो इसका ये मतलब होता है इज दैट द मिशन इज टू क्रिएट ग्रेट फाइनेंशियल प्रोडक्ट्स दैट हेल्प इन्वेस्टर्स अचीव देयर फाइनेंशियल गोल्स। तो ये मॉर्निंग स्टार का मिशन रहा है। एंड currently we are present in about 29 countries, employing more than 9,000 people across these countries. और हम जो डेटा प्रोवाइड कर रहे हैं अलग अलग फाइनेंशियल प्रोडक्ट्स पे, मोर देन 600,000 या 6 लाख से ज्यादा इन्वेस्टमेंट प्रोडक्ट्स पे हम डेटा प्रोवाइड करते हैं। एंड ऑफ कोर्स आप थोड़ा बहुत आप लोग जानते भी होंगे कि भाई मॉर्निंगस्टार हैज बीन is a globally trusted name in independent investment research as well. And थोड़ा सा इंट्रोडक्शन में इन्वेस्टमेंट मैनेजमेंट ग्रुप का भी दूंगा, जो जिस टीम the team that I and my colleagues are part of. ये टीम जो है Morningstar, it's part of Morningstar as a company, and this team is responsible for providing investment advisory and portfolio management solutions. तो ये solutions जो हम provide करते हैं, we provide them to obviously end investors, but ज्यादा करके markets में ये provide करने के लिए we partner with advisors. So जो हमारी partnership है, जो mode of we work closely with advisors to deliver these solutions to the end investors. Of course, जो advisor है वो हम recognize करते हैं कि he or she knows the investor best, right? So of course relationship उनकी है, और we partner with them to provide these solutions to to the end investors as such. And Morningstar ने काफी इन्वेस्टमेंट किया ये ग्रुप को बिल्ड करने के लिए. तो करीबन यही ग्रुप में अराउंड 550 प्लस एम्प्लॉइज है, उसमें से अबाउट 95 और जो है इन्वेस्टमेंट प्रोफेशनल्स है. सो 95 पीपल हुज डे टू डे जॉब इज टू ट्रैक मार्केट्स, एसेट क्लासेस पे व्यूज बिल्ड करना, पोर्टफोलियोज मैनेज करना, उनको रिव्यू करना, यही उनका डे टू डे जॉब है. सो fairly strong team is what I would say, which we have built globally as such. और हम यहाँ इंडिया में ये टीम को लेवरेज कैसे करते हैं, जैसे मैंने कहा ग्लोबल टीम काफी बड़ी है, तो उसको हम लेवरेज कैसे करते हैं. तो जो इन्वेस्टमेंट मैनेजमेंट ग्रुप है वो 3 रीजन्स में स्प्लिट है, अमेरिकाज, ईमिया और एशिया पैसिफिक. और हर एक रीजन में एक सेंटर ऑफ एक्सीलेंस या एक हब आइडेंटिफाई करी है, जिसमें वी हैव अ लार्ज इन्वेस्टमेंट टीम, और जो उस रीजन में जो कंट्रीज है वो सेंटर ऑफ एक्सीलेंस या जो हब है उसके साथ क्लोजली काम करते हैं. तो जैसे एशिया पैसिफिक में इन सिडनी इन ऑस्ट्रेलिया वी हैव अ लार्ज इन्वेस्टमेंट टीम. सो जो कंट्रीज एशिया पैसिफिक में है, इंक्लूडिंग हमारी जो टीम है इंडिया में, वी वर्क क्लोजली विद आवर सिडनी इन्वेस्टमेंट टीम टू बिल्ड सॉल्यूशंस फॉर द लोकल मार्केट एंड टू मैनेज पोर्टफोलियो. सो इफेक्टिवली इससे फायदा ये होता है कि हम हमारी जो ग्लोबल एक्सपीरियंस है, ग्लोबल रिसोर्सेज है, उसको हम कंबाइन कर सकते हैं हमारी लोकल पोर्टफोलियो मैनेजमेंट एक्सपीरियंस के साथ. एंड दैट इज हाउ वी डिलीवर सॉल्यूशंस टू इन्वेस्टर्स एंड एडवाइजर्स. अभी चेंजिंग ट्रैक अ बिट एंड कमिंग टू द मेन टॉपिक ऑफ डिस्कशन, ऑफ कोर्स हमने देखा है कि in recent times the impact has been quite strong on markets. In fact, markets even before ये जो करंट क्राइसिस जो यूक्रेन और रशिया में चल रही है, उसके पहले भी हम देखें तो दिसंबर जनवरी में भी वोलेटिलिटी बढ़ गई थी मार्केट्स में. इसका कारण ये था कि ऑफ कोर्स कंसर्न्स थे कि इन्फ्लेशन बढ़ रहा है, और फेडरल रिजर्व और दूसरे जो सेंट्रल बैंक्स है डेवलप मार्केट्स में, वो उनको इंटरेस्ट रेट्स इंक्रीज करने पड़ेंगे. अभी आप लेटेस्ट नंबर भी देखिए, यूएस में जो इन्फ्लेशन का नंबर है करीबन इट्स मोर देन 7.5%, अबाउट 7.9% सीपीआई का जो इन्फ्लेशन नंबर आया, दैट इज द हाईएस्ट इन अबाउट 40 इयर्स. तो वो जो कंसर्न्स रही है वो ऑलरेडी उससे मार्केट में इम्पैक्ट था, और उसके बाद फिर ये जो रशिया और यूक्रेन की क्राइसिस आई है, उसके बाद मार्केट में ऑफ कोर्स और भी थोड़ा इम्पैक्ट हुआ है. तो यहाँ पे ये स्लाइड पे आप देखेंगे तो हमने 2 चीज दिखाई है. एक तो लेफ्ट हैंड साइड में ईयर टू डेट जो 2022 1st Jan 2022 टिल अबाउट 9th of March, हाउ हैव डिफरेंट, हमने कुछ सिलेक्ट मार्केट्स भी ऑफ कोर्स इंडिया को भी यहाँ पे इंक्लूड किया है. तो सिलेक्ट इंडियन मार्केट्स एज वेल, लार्ज कैप, मिड कैप, स्मॉल कैप. इंडिया में निफ्टी 100 मिड कैप और स्मॉल कैप है. फिर S&P 500 ऑब्वियसली जो ये जो यूएस का ब्रॉड इंडेक्स है, फिर यूरोप, ऑल कंट्री वर्ल्ड. तो ये काफी इंडेक्सेस के हम यहाँ पे ईयर टू डेट परफॉर्मेंस देख रहे हैं. तो इसमें एक चीज इंटरेस्टिंग है देखने के लिए, ऑफ कोर्स मोस्ट मार्केट्स आर इन नेगेटिव टेरिटरी, तो वो तो यहाँ पे दिख के आ रहा है. लेकिन इसमें एक दो इंटरेस्टिंग पॉइंट्स जो है कि जो सबसे ज्यादा करेक्शन आया है ईयर टू डेट, दैट इज इन ग्रोथ काइंड ऑफ सेगमेंट. आई मीन ग्रोथ, जैसे हम ग्रोथ स्टाइल जो बोलते हैं या ग्रोथ स्टॉक्स जो बोलते हैं, उसमें ज्यादा करेक्शन आया है. जैसे आप नैस्डैक 100 देखेंगे या S&P ग्रोथ इंडेक्स जो है, which includes the bigger companies which are classified as growth kind of within the growth style, तो उनमें ज्यादा करेक्शन थोड़ा आया है. एंड दिस इज बिकॉज उनमें रन अप भी अच्छा खासा हुआ था. सो दिस correction we have to see in the context of since the lows of March 2020 इंडिया में और दूसरे मार्केट्स में भी रन अप काफी स्ट्रॉन्ग रहा है, एंड वैल्यूएशंस काफी क्वाइट रिच हो गए थे. मतलब पर्टिकुलरली यूएस इक्विटीज में तो 6-7 साल से रन अप ऑलरेडी चल रहा था, तो उससे वैल्यूएशन काफी रीच ऑलरेडी हो गए थे। तो इसलिए हम जो देख रहे हैं कि ग्रोथ स्टॉक्स में करेक्शन ज्यादा आया है, और वैल्यू जो स्टॉक्स है जैसे S&P 500 वैल्यू इंडेक्स है उसमें करेक्शन कम आया है। Of course, Russian equities, as we know, markets from about 24th, 25th Feb have been closed for, they are not sort of operating, but till that period they were down by more than 40%. Of course, Russian currency पे भी काफी impact आया है. The Russian currency ruble is down, over the last 2 months by about 40% or so versus the US dollar. और ये सब क्यों हो रहा है, हमें of course थोड़ा बहुत तो हमें जानकारी सबको है ही, क्योंकि media is also talking about it, but that of course Russia is a big supplier of many commodities. Normally हम सुनते हैं oil और gas के बारे में, लेकिन आप दूसरी commodities भी देखें, including agri commodities and other industrial metals as well. Russia is a big is a big supplier and producer of these commodities. तो ये जो chart है यहाँ हम देख रहे हैं, this chart represents Russia's share of commodity production within the global setup. जो globally manufacture जैसे palladium है, out of the total palladium that's extracted globally and put out, is 37% is coming from Russia, right? So ऐसे जो काफी in case of petroleum, 16% of the world's petroleum is coming from Russia, and Russia is the second largest producer of petroleum after the United States. हम लोग को लगता है कि most of it is coming from Saudi, but actually of course Middle East in total is a big producer, but individual country wise if you look at Russia and US are the biggest producers of petroleum as such, and of course even natural gas, about 22% of the world's natural gas, ये भी काफी this is again a very substantial proportion is coming from Russia. Again, it is that it is the second largest producer behind the United States. So clearly काफी commodities, in fact आप इसमें जो नीचे chart भी दिया है आप देखेंगे तो there are several agri commodities as well, जैसे whether it's wheat or barley or oats, तो इसमें भी काफी proportion ज्यादा है. In fact wheat में if you combine Russia and Ukraine, I think about 20-25% of the world's wheat is coming from these two countries. So इसकी वजह से हम जो देख रहे हैं, there has been a big impact on commodity prices, right? अभी particularly over the last few months, but in fact यहाँ पे we are looking at how major commodities have moved since 2020, right? Because the rally in commodities or the uptick in commodities has not started only from now. वो पहले से ही मतलब because of different reasons, later part of 2020 onwards, जब vaccination की availability पे confidence आ गया था और demand recovery हो रही थी, तो commodity prices तभी already recover होने start हो गए थे. तो फिर आप यहाँ पे what we are seeing is on the left hand side, if you look at, we are showing you how major commodities or commodity baskets have moved. If you look at commodities as a whole, this includes all of the ones that are below that list, whether it is industrial imports and food commodities as well. Overall commodities are up by about 59% since January 2020. So करीबन 2 साल में they are up by almost 60% as it states. इसमें if you look at, obviously food prices are up about 35%. Again, food prices in more recent times have moved up, wheat prices and so on and so forth. So they are up. Industrial metals जैसे because of one is earlier obviously demand recovering stronger and recovery being stronger, or supply side issues भी थे. The supply was not able to keep up with the demand. That is why metal prices have already been going up even before this crisis started, और उसके बाद फिर some of them have gone up even further. Similarly, crude oil from 2020 is up about 57% already, and again in recent times currently it is trading about $108-110 a barrel of crude as such. So they have moved up again further in recent times, but some of this uptrend has already taken place over the last 1.5 years or so. Natural gas, of course, in more recent times has shot up. One is because of the crisis, and before that also on account of the additional demand that we saw from European markets as such. So commodity prices as we are seeing has moved up. और इसका impact क्या हो रहा है? As we can see towards, if you look at the right hand side, the impact is clearly on inflation. That is one of the important areas where higher commodity prices are impacting the economy, and that is where central banks, of course, before this crisis, Bank of England had already started raising rates. Federal Reserve is due to meet later this month. So now the question is that to what extent will they raise rates? And the reason is because inflation has been over the last year and a half has moved above their target levels. So if you look at ये जो left hand side में graph है, which is titled Advanced Economies, यहाँ पे हम दिखा रहे हैं how inflation in the US, UK, Euro, and Japan have moved, right? So the dotted line that you see in between, normally developed countries में जो उनका inflation target है is around 2%. So and many of these countries, as we know, Japan, they have not been able to reach those levels for several years. But other countries were below that level, and over the last पिछले 1-1.5 साल में, inflation has started to move up, and across, except for Japan, across all other countries, it is now much above their targeted levels. So that is the reason why we are seeing central banks being more concerned. And अभी तो ये situation में, where they are not sure now of how the economy is going to continue to grow in this in this environment, and secondly inflation भी बढ़ रहा है. So दोनों challenges अभी है central banks के सामने. Emerging markets have also, some emerging markets जैसे Brazil, if you look at the right hand side graph, Brazil, which is the purple line out here, and Russia have seen a spike in inflation. Fortunately India, we still haven't seen inflation move up, but of course we know कि इसके काफी कारण है. एक तो पिछले 1-1.5 महीने से fuel prices बढ़े नहीं. Although internationally crude oil prices बढ़ चुके हैं, but because of state elections, the government chose not to increase petrol and diesel prices. Now, once these state elections, as we know, are now done, तो अभी एक सवाल है कि अभी government कैसे उस चीज पे react करेगी. The indications are that they have to increase prices, but to what extent, whether they will cut taxes or whether they will partially allow the underlying price to also increase, but sooner or later the prices will go up. So जो inflation concerns India में है वो भी बढ़ेंगे, and it's not just, as we know, it's not just कि petrol और diesel के prices बढ़ेंगे, but उनका जो trickle down effect है, transportation costs being higher and so on, so which will result in a higher fuel costs translating into other forms of inflation as well. And of course उसका दूसरा जो impact है is on corporate margins, right? Because commodity prices have moved up, fuel prices have moved up, there is a concern that margins for corporates will also come down over the next few quarters in particular, right? If we now look at India a little more closely, जो left hand side में जो graph है is the graph of India imports about 80-85% of its crude oil requirements, right? And here we are showing which are the countries or regions from which India is importing its crude oil. And as we can see, Russia is a very small component of this, so that is not so much of a concern. Of course, bulk of it is coming from the UAE, and then obviously Saudi Arabia and US and the other countries. Iraq as well, again, is a big component of our supplier of crude oil to India. So from Russia, maybe directly we are not importing as much crude. It's just about 1.5% of our requirements. But the important thing is the prices have gone up already, right? So that concern still remains, that how this will translate into additional sort of inflation as such. And secondly, besides crude oil, India imports 60-70% of its edible oil requirement. Sunflower oil and so on and so forth. A lot of it is being imported, and a good share of that comes from Russia and Ukraine, right? So that is also an area of concern, that edible oil prices might also move up, because of the current scenario as such, right? And on the right hand side, you can see, sort of RBI के जो projections थे, their projections for inflation and how inflation has moved in recent times. Again, I don't want you to go through the graph in too much of detail, but जो last policy RBI की जो monetary policy meeting हुई थी February में, early February, that time RBI surprised the markets by projecting that inflation will actually come down to about 4.5% in the next financial year. तो अगले financial year में जो April 2022 से start हो रहा है, their expectation was that inflation नीचे आ जाएगा और पूरे साल के लिए it will average 4.5%. Right now, with all of this that is happening, with commodity prices moving up, जो अभी तक हमने discuss किया, there is a likelihood that RBI might be forced to increase their forecast. And in fact, just over the last couple of days, there have been some signals. I mean, some of the RBI governors have been, giving remarks that they will need to relook at not just the inflation forecast, matlab, they may need to increase their inflation forecast, but also they may need to relook at their growth expectation, right? Because of this, global scenario where there are some trade barriers coming up, there are blockages, and there might be a slowdown in the global economy. So isliye, that could also impact India's economic growth in the near term. So those are the immediate sort of concerns for India as such. But keeping this aside, of course, there is a lot of discussion in the media about what's happening right now. There is so much of news out there. But when we look at history, like over the last 15-20 years, जो भी geopolitical events हुए हैं, and there have been several which are listed out here. So I would suggest you to just focus on the table on the top here, and the graph has got a lot of lines moving here and there, so you can just focus on the table, which is a summary of the graph. तो इसमें जो पिछले 15-20 साल में major geopolitical events हुए हैं, उसके 3-6 और 12 महीने बाद market का performance कैसे रहा है? How have the markets reacted after that time period, right? So normally, and as you can see out here, events such as 9/11, which was the terrorist attack on US, Iraq war, Iran drone strike against Saudi Arabia, which happened in 2019. In 2014, Russia had also captured Crimea. So at that point, so that was in a way similar. Of course, that was a smaller region, but as to what is happening today as such. But after all of these geopolitical events, we have seen that normally within a period of 1 year, markets recover हो जाते हैं, except for the 9/11 event, जहाँ पे markets were still impacted even after 1 year. But over a 1 year period, as you can see, the S&P 500 recovered within that time period. So effectively हमें ये लगता है कि of course right now there is a lot of noise and a lot of media coverage, but if you look at history, as we can see out here, over the medium to long term, markets the economy tends to recover, and markets also tend to recover, right? And that sort of reminds us of a famous saying from World War II, which says, keep calm and carry on. So that is how we are viewing, our sort of, our views when we are taking calls on asset classes, is we are thinking more from, what could be the impact, क्या impact हो सकता है economy पे, markets में अगले 6 या मतलब over the next 2, 3, 4 years, rather than just over the next 6 to 12 months as such. So this sort of brings me to an area where I can talk a little bit about that हमारा what our views are on different asset classes, हमारे अलग-अलग asset classes पे क्या views बन रहे हैं, and what is the approach, और हम क्या process use करके वो views build कर रहे हैं, ठीक है? So I'll first talk about our investment approach, that how do we build views on different asset classes, हम views कैसे build करते हैं, generate करते हैं. So there are 4 pillars to this approach, and the 4 pillars essentially are, the first pillar is absolute valuation. So what we try to study is that for a particular asset class, समझ लीजिए Indian equities, relative to its history, is the asset class looking cheap or expensive today, right? So therefore, over the next 5 to 10 years, what is it that I can expect in terms of a return, as well as what is the risk that I'm taking? So first is to look at absolute valuation relative to its history. Are Indian equities looking cheap or expensive today, right? So that is the first step we follow, comparing one asset class to its own history. दूसरा जो step है is relative valuation. So similar asset classes, so Indian equity versus say US equity versus emerging markets versus European equity. Compared to similar asset classes, is this asset class looking cheap or expensive versus similar asset classes? So इसमें हम ये derive कर सकते हैं कि भी कौन सी market ज़्यादा attractive लग रही है as compared to each other as such, right? So that is the second step or the second pillar that we look at. जो तीसरा पिलर है जिसे हम कहते हैं कॉन्ट्रेरियन इंडिकेटर, राइट? सो इसका ये मतलब होता है कि इज व्हाट इज द मार्केट्स सेंटिमेंट टुवर्ड्स दैट एसेट क्लास, right? And I will talk more about each of these as we go ahead and how we have built our views. But contrarian indicators in a way show us what is the market sentiment towards that asset class. So if we feel that everybody is very positive about that asset class, जैसे हम कुछ महीने पहले तक देख रहे थे, everybody was talking about US equities and the big technology companies and so on and so forth, right? So it indicated that there is a lot of optimism, a lot of money flowing towards that asset class. So as a contrarian investor, we will be a little bit cautious, because if there is too much of money chasing an asset class, there is a chance that it might be overvalued, right? So that is how we look at contrarian indicators as well, that what is the market sentiment? Is there too much optimism or pessimism towards a certain asset class? And then finally, fundamental risk. What are the various risks that could impact my view, right? I mean, can there be, what is the potential for a permanent loss of capital, or and things like that? So what is the fundamental risk involved in investing in that market or asset class? So using these 4 parameters, then or pillars, we build our views across different asset classes. So let's look at some results of this. So what is the results of this process? So first, looking at the first 2 pillars, which is absolute and relative valuation, right? So as of end of February, what we essentially do is, for each asset class, we build out an expected return, that agle 5 or 10 saal mein, what is the kind of return that I'm expecting from that asset class, right? And from that market or asset class, as the case might be. और ये जो returns हम देख रहे हैं, these are real returns. Real returns का ये मतलब होता है कि inflation adjusted returns. और हम क्यों inflation से adjust करते हैं? So that it can be compared across different markets. क्योंकि developed markets में normally inflation कम होता है over longer periods, अभी तो फिलहाल ज़्यादा है, लेकिन और emerging markets में थोड़ा ज़्यादा हो सकता है inflation. तो we remove that inflation impact, and eventually this is the return that your investor earns, right? I mean, inflation का जो factor है वो तो it is going away, because that is eating away at your money as such. So here we are looking at 2 things. One is, we have just picked out some major markets worldwide, including Indian equities and fixed income as well. And we are comparing 2 periods, that what are the real return expectations as of February end, February 22 versus February 21. Okay, that is February 2021. So 1 year, how has that changed over the last 1 year? And of course, as of now, at least among major markets, we think Chinese equities are probably looking more attractive as compared to many other markets, because China में काफी पिछले साल काफी correction आ गया था due to regulatory changes and regulatory impact, which impacted share prices of many major companies. And even as of now, there are those concerns are still there. But from our point of view, over the last 1 year, that return expectation has improved quite strongly, because valuations have come down. Right? Among other markets, we think UK equities and Japan are looking relatively attractive, again, because the valuations are not very rich. Indian equities, of course, last 1 year we've seen some improvement, because the growth prospects in our view have improved, but it's not looking as attractive because valuations are still slightly rich, and we will cover this in later slides as well. Indian debt is also looking reasonably attractive, in our view, from a real return perspective over the next 5 to 10 years. And if you look at other markets, such as major markets such as US equities, where there has been a lot of interest, particularly over the last 1.5 years, वहाँ पे हमारा conviction थोड़ा कम है. We think the return expectations are not looking very great, because they've had a very strong run. So वहाँ जो valuations है, they are quite rich. So although we've seen some corrections over the last 1 to 2 since say December or so, तो इससे थोड़े return expectations improve हुए, but they are still fairly low at this point of time. So what is it that is driving these returns? जैसे हमने previous slide पे we saw various return expectations. So what is it that's driving these returns? So here there are 3 factors that drive long-term returns in our view, right? And these 3 factors are dividend yields, or total yield includes buyback yield as well. Like TCS in India recently announced a buyback, so the yield that you're getting because of that buyback price is also included in the total yield. In US, it's still a big component. India, mostly it's dividend yield. The second is earnings and cash flow growth. So अगले 5 या 10 साल में what is the expectation of earnings growth and cash flows? And then finally is the valuation factor. So जैसे हम यहाँ देख रहे हैं, you know, as I mentioned on the previous slide, you know, we've taken again major markets over here. China में, you know, the valuation component is positive. उसका ये मतलब होता है कि valuations are below their normal or average levels. So that is why it is adding the dark green portion is for valuation adjustment, the light green is for earnings and cash flow growth, and the blue is for yield, right? So all these three are positive, and therefore the real return expectation is fairly decent. For India, the growth component is good and better than most other, you know, developed markets, as we can see, which is the green portion. And the yield component is also positive, but valuation is because markets are above still trading above fair value, it could have a negative impact on returns going ahead, right? So therefore it is, you know, it is a negative factor, and that is reducing the return expectation for India. Similarly, most other markets are also relatively expensive. I mean, although, you know, some places it's lesser. I mean, say UK, the valuation adjustment is lesser, so it's not as expensive, you know, as particularly the US market, where, you know, which probably major markets में हमें ये लगता है कि US equities probably, you know, सबसे ज़्यादा expensive है even as of now. So that is pulling down the return expectations from US equities as such. And just looking quickly at the contrarian indicators, if you recall, we've covered two pillars: absolute valuation, relative valuation, और तीसरा जो pillar है contrarian indicators है. So यहाँ पे and I'll not spend too much time on these graphs. There are, I know, about 4 small charts over here, but we look at 3 main parameters जब हम contrarian indicators देखते हैं. The first one is the momentum score. So पिछले 6 से 12 महीने में वो मार्केट में परफॉर्मेंस कैसे रहा है, that is the momentum score, right? If the markets have done very well, it will be a negative indicator. And the second is the flow score, which looks at what are the, you know, fund flows into that particular market. The third is whether they have been very strong or they have been, you know, negative as such. The third is the next 12 month earnings expectation. So is, you know, are the expectations above normal or are they below normal for that particular market, or फिर we arrive at the aggregate score. So here we have plotted for India and for US. So I'll directly come to maybe the aggregate score, which is on the right hand side, which is a combination of all of these 3 other parameters. Overall जो हम देख रहे हैं कि and when the score is negative, it means that, you know, markets are it gives us a negative indicator in the sense that it indicates that markets are probably still slightly overheated, or the expectations are still high. Say, for example, if you look at earnings expectations in India, you know, of course, very soon probably analysts might start revising them. But, you know, if you look at just 1 or 2 months ago, they were pretty strong, right? People were expecting, most analysts were expecting कि Indian equities में earnings growth जो होगी वो अगले 2 साल में 20 से 25% की होगी. मतलब every year their expectation about 20-25% earnings growth, which is above, you know, normal level as such. So, you know, if I combine all the indicators together, you know, they are improving right now, but they are still in negative territory. So therefore it indicates to us that market में अभी भी optimism है. Markets थोड़े correct हुए हैं, but still that optimism has not completely gone off. So markets have still not priced in fully, you know, the current scenario as such. So that is what this indicator, you know, tells us in a way. And finally, if I were to summarize these views and look at, you know, what is the sort of overall conviction level for different asset classes, you know, at least we feel that, you know, our convictions are a medium to high. So medium to high indicates obviously a fairly good conviction on those asset classes within equities. You know, whether it is UK, Germany, or you know, ये दो जो markets है, our convictions are pretty good right now. We think वहाँ पे valuations attractive है. Emerging markets भी attractive लग रहे हैं as compared to US markets at least. And you know, China is also in the medium conviction kind of, you know, bucket as such. So that is on the you know, global equity side, and India की views में अभी, you know, next slide में cover करूँगा. Bonds में हम देखें तो, you know, generally हमने ये देखा है कि अभी off late yields, you know, global bonds में बढ़ रहे हैं, you know, US yields which Milind bhai mentioned in the introduction as well. You know, US yields obviously have moved up the 10-year is above 2% and so on and so forth. But despite that move, we think that the level of yields are still relatively low. So there is a risk of capital loss that is still there, if you're investing in bonds in developed markets. So इसलिए हम अब देखेंगे तो our conviction on developed market bonds are relatively low. On the other hand, we have a medium to high conviction on local currency emerging market debt, such as Indian bonds or some other emerging markets as well, because here the yields are still at a relatively higher level, and they are looking more attractive as such. So just quickly looking at Indian equities little more closely. Left hand side में हम जो देखेंगे, if you look at the graph on the top left hand side, it indicates the corporate profit to GDP ratio over the last about 20 years or so, right? Starting from financial year 2000, going up to the year that went by, and then the expectations there. So we saw a period up to 2008 or so, financial year 2008, when the corporate profit to GDP ratio was increasing, right? And it peaked in financial year 2008, और उसके बाद से it has been coming down, right? So effectively, that is what is a reflection of the economy. हम पिछले 3-4 साल से, even before COVID, the economy was slowing down, right? So when corporate profitability wasn't very great, पिछले 4-5 साल से तो of course capex cycle was slow, bad loans ज़्यादा थे, in the financial sector as well, credit growth भी कम था, etc. So the corporate profits had actually as a percentage of GDP had come down, right? But since last year we are seeing this trend starting to change, right? And the expectation is that as corporate deleveraging has happened, as there is expectation capex cycle start hoga, government is also pushing for capex to start. They've come up with various schemes such as the PLI schemes and so on, trying to push manufacturing. So isse we think the corporate profit to GDP ratio should start to move up, right? And this is also reflected in the earnings growth expectation. जैसे मैं पहले बोल रहा था कि अगले 1-2 साल के जो earnings growth expectations है, ये if you look at the chart on the left hand side bottom corner, these show the Nifty EPS growth expectations over the next 2 to 3 years, right? And the expectation is that earnings will grow, as I mentioned earlier, by about 20 to 24%, CAGR over the next 2 years or so. Of course, these are now due for revision given what is happening in commodity prices and concerns of slowdown and all of that. But this maybe about a couple of months ago, as of end of December, these were the expectations at that point of time at least. So there is an expectation that earnings will grow at a faster pace, और ये जो इसकी वजह से जो corporate profit to GDP ratio है वो भी improve होगा. But how are markets looking at this? You can see that in the charts on the right hand side. Here we are looking at the valuations for on a 1 year forward basis, both for the Nifty, both on a price to earning as well as price to book basis as such. And जो हम देख रहे हैं कि if you look at the 1 year forward PE, it is still trading probably slightly above its longer term average. So longer term average for 1 year PE for Nifty is about 18.3 times. If I adjust this chart for जो recent अभी corrections हुए हैं market में पिछले 15-20 दिन में, so maybe it will still be maybe about 19.4 times or so is where the 1 year forward PE is right now. So it is still above fair value. So in other words, markets has captured a lot of this optimism, but ये जो risks है, maybe they are not being fully priced into the markets right now, right? So similarly, if you look at the 1 year forward PB ratio, which is the price to book ratio, again, about 3 odd times versus an average of about 2.7 times. And again, this ratio might have come down a little bit further, but it is still slightly above its long-term average. So in a way, हमारा view ये है कि markets are still, although there has been some correction, but some of that optimism is still there, is still being factored into the current valuations and prices. So there is a likelihood that the returns over the near term might be a little bit on the lower side, and which is what we saw in the earlier slides as well. So how do we capture all of these views in terms of actionable ideas, in terms of investment opportunities or investment options as such? So essentially in India, we've sort of it's almost 3 years now, we've acquired a PMS license. So we do offer a set of strategies on the PMS platform as such. So these are a set of 4 multi-asset strategies that we offer, where all these views, just जो हमने पहले अभी पिछले कुछ slides में हमारे views देखे, हमारे convictions देखे, these in a way many of them get incorporated in these strategies that we are offering out here. So just quickly talking about these portfolios, as you can see, these are multi-asset portfolios, right? So इसका ये मतलब होता है we are investing in different asset classes which include Indian equity, fixed income, and international equity. So these are the 3 major asset classes that we are investing into these portfolios. And as you can see, each portfolio is suited for a different investment horizon and a different risk appetite. जैसे कि balanced portfolio is suited for a horizon of 5 to 7 years for somebody with a moderate kind of risk appetite. और जैसे risk appetite और investment horizon improve होती है, increase होती है, the allocation to growth assets such as obviously equities, both domestic and international, tends to increase. So that is what is reflected in the growth, aggressive, and aggressive plus portfolio. One more thing, if you would have noticed in these portfolios, is that जो पहले 3 portfolios है, जो active balance, active growth और aggressive, ये Indian और international assets में diversified है. Whereas the 4th portfolio, which is an aggressive plus portfolio, is a domestic only portfolio. So we thought we should have one option which is a domestic only kind of option. Given that in India, at least till recently, most people were focusing on the local market as such. So we thought we'll have one such option in there. But the other 3 are diversified across domestic and international assets. And a couple of more things about these portfolios is that the asset allocation is actively managed based on our views. तो उसका ये मतलब होता है कि if you look at, say for instance, if I take the example of the growth portfolio, if you look at the allocations जो ये donut chart पे है, the blue portion is the domestic equity allocation, which is 54%, 16% is international equity, and 30% is fixed income and cash, right? Now these allocations are, we call them as neutral or strategic allocations. So if the market is trading, if that respective asset class is trading at fair value, Indian equity, if they're trading in our view at fair valuation, we will allocate 54% to Indian equity in the growth portfolio, and so on. But as we know, markets are very, on many occasions are either overvalued or undervalued, right? They're either cheap or expensive. They're not always at fair value. So therefore, based on our views, if we find markets are overvalued, we will reduce allocations to, that particular asset class and move that money to another asset class that is looking more attractive. So that is why the allocations, say in the growth portfolio for Indian equity, will be in a range of 40 to 70%, fixed income in the range of 20 to 50%, and international equity in 0 to 30, right? And within each of these baskets, we are investing in different buckets as well. So Indian equity, the allocation is split across large, mid, and small cap, debt into cash, short-term, medium-term, and long-term debt based on duration and credit, and international equity into US, Europe, and emerging markets. So these are the main regions and main asset classes that we are sort of covering. The idea out here, very simple, and I'll move ahead quickly, is to invest more in asset classes that are looking attractive and lesser in asset classes that are not looking very attractive. By that way, I'm able to reduce my downside risk, which we many times see that when valuations are high, it impacts, it can result in a downturn. So reducing downside risk and trying to improve, generate better, risk-adjusted kind of return. And why all of these asset classes, right? I mean, why international equity, usme Europe, emerging, US, or why so many asset classes in the portfolio, right? So, and this is a slightly busy chart, but I don't want you to go through all the numbers. But हमने यहाँ क्या किया है कि हमने major asset classes globally जो available हैं और इंडिया में भी जो available हैं वो हमने लिए हैं starting from US equity to developed markets, Indian equity, fixed income, Europe and emerging markets. 2008 से लेके for each calendar year, what has been the performance of each of these asset classes is what we have mapped down, and all these returns are in rupee terms. So as an Indian investor, अपने ये सब asset classes में invest किया होता, so what was the calendar year wise return that you would have generated? Okay. And the other thing that we have done is that for each calendar year, जो asset class का performance सबसे अच्छा रहा है, that is marked in a dark green shade, and the worst performing asset class is marked in a pink, dark pink kind of shade. So जैसे 2008 Indian equities, of course, global financial crisis की वजह से, the correction was sharp. Indian equities were the worst performing amongst these markets. So it's, down about 57-58%, whereas fixed income generated a positive return, so it is marked in a dark green shade. तो इसमें एक दो ट्रेंड जो इंटरेस्टिंग है, जो आपको नोटिस करनी चाहिए कि year on year it's very difficult to predict the winner and loser. That कौन सा asset class सबसे अच्छा परफॉर्म करेगा और कौन सा सबसे बुरा परफॉर्म करेगा, it's very difficult to predict. The trend changes quite a lot, right? जैसे 2008 देखेंगे, India was worst performing, but the next 2 years it was the best performing asset class, and then again 2011 it underperformed, right? So similarly, you look at across time periods, there are those periods where it's done very well and it's underperformed in the next year, like 2017 or 2021 for that matter as well, right? So, but the other interesting thing to note is also that कुछ साल ऐसे हैं जहां पे इंडियन इक्विटीज ने अंडरपरफॉर्म किया है, बट ग्लोबल मार्केट्स ने उस साल में अच्छा परफॉर्मेंस दिया है. जैसे 2011 का पीरियड देखेंगे, इंडियन इक्विटीज वर डाउन 26%, बट यूएस या डेवलप्ड मार्केट्स वर अप quite smartly during that period. Similarly, 2013 का भी पीरियड देखेंगे, इंडियन इक्विटीज जनरेटेड अ 5% रिटर्न, but US equities are up 50%, right, which is a substantial number. So similarly, even recent periods में 2019 में भी देखेंगे तो Indian equities again was an underperformer, but other developed markets, in fact other emerging markets also did well during that year, right? So in other words, the point is it pays to be diversified because different asset classes will do well at different points of time. And towards the end, if you look at the last 3 columns, we have put down the CAGR performance since from 1st Jan 2008 till till as of 9th of March 2022. And as you can see that developed markets led by US equities have been the best performing asset class over this time period, right? And हमने एक और चीज इसमें ऐड करी है, is a multi-asset portfolio, which is a 50-50 equity debt portfolio, out of which about 40% is Indian equity, 10% is global equity, and the remaining, out of 50% remaining, 45% is Indian debt and 5% is gold. And uska bhi performance humne yahan third, if you look at the third row out here, is the performance for the multi-asset portfolio, right? So this portfolio has done better than a few asset classes. It's not the best performer, of course, but usme volatility kam rahi hai. So if you look at the drawdowns in, during the global financial crisis or during even 2020 at the onset of COVID, the drawdowns for the multi-asset portfolio have been lesser than most other markets except for obviously fixed income as such. So in other words, the return has been more steadier, the fluctuation has been lesser, and the drawdowns have also been lower. So I'll just quickly try and wrap up as soon as possible. I know we've just got a couple of slides to go and we are about 40-45 minutes down. So how do we manage these allocations in the portfolios? And very quickly, normally जब हम देखेंगे कि when markets have not done very well and when valuations are looking reasonable is when we will reduce our allocations to debt and cash and increase our allocations to growth assets such as equity, right? So this is like, again, the contrarian view or the contrarian thinking. जैसे off late we have been rebalancing our portfolios a bit. Of course, markets are still not cheap as such, but we have been adding a little bit back to equities, given the sharp fall in the market. So when markets have not done very well and valuations are looking reasonable is when we will, tend to add back to equities as such. And when markets are very strong, right, and the performance has been very strong, like US equities was a classic case, and valuations are looking stretched, we will tend to be underweight, equities and those particular markets or asset classes. So that is how typically the allocations will tend to sort of move as such. And just finally, just looking at how the current allocation in the aggressive portfolio is looking like, and here we have done two things. Just say, in one of the previous slides I showed you our normal allocation versus, so this is showing you the current allocation versus our normal allocation for each of these asset classes. So large caps in the aggressive portfolio, we are close to neutral. We think large caps are looking, reasonably valued. They are not very cheap nor very expensive as such. But mid and small caps, we are underweight. So if you can see, our current allocation, which is the green bar, is below the normal allocation. So mid cap, we are lower by about 1.5%, and small cap by about 0.5% or so. So versus our normal allocation. So effectively, हमें ये लगता है कि mid और small caps थोड़े अभी भी expensive है. They've had a very strong rally. So we are up slightly below our normal weight. US equities, we've reduced our underweight, but we are still about 2.5% below our normal weightage as such. And similarly, on the other hand, debt and emerging markets are looking attractive. So वहाँ पे the green bar is higher than the orange bar, which is, our current weightage is higher than the normal weightage because we feel those asset classes are looking slightly more attractive at this point of time. So, just summarizing the solution as such, I mean, the strategies that we offer, one is we think it's the, why you should look at these strategies, because it's a start to end solution, right from asset allocation to fund selection to, portfolio construction review, all of it is covered within, this solution. Again, these strategies that we offer for your options, काफी, there are 4 strategies है, अलग risk profile और अलग investment horizon के हिसाब से, suiting different investor needs, and you're getting benefit of Morningstar's, global and local portfolio management, expertise through these kind of strategies. And finally, the costs will tend to be lower as compared to, some of the other PMS strategies available, in the marketplace as such. And just to wrap up with, the key takeaways from, today's presentation as such is that one is, of course, what we are seeing, happening between Russia and Ukraine as उससे investor sentiment काफी change हुआ है, volatility बढ़ गई है, there is a lot of negativity in the markets as such, and of course energy prices, commodity prices, are an area which will see a lot of volatility and impact as such. But as we saw, okay, normally ये जो geopolitical events है, over a period of about 1.5 years, the impact of that tends to reduce. So therefore, we believe that, one should keep calm and carry on in that sense with the work that, I mean, focus on the fundamentals and focus on valuation. And therefore, long-term approach, we think will help against making unwise decisions, which are, driven by short-term fears and short-term concerns. And that's what we are trying to do using a fundamental and evaluation-driven approach to identify, attractive opportunities and assess the opportunity set as such. So with that, I'll sort of stop here and I'll hand over to you again, Milind bhai.
Yes. Thank you, Dhaval bhai, for a great insights. And the main learning is keep calm and carry on.
Yeah.
So, friends, thank you very much. And let's have some questions. If you have any, please post your questions in Q&A box. प्लीज उसको चैट बॉक्स में मत डालिएगा, नहीं तो वो चैट बॉक्स में ऊपर चले जाएंगे. तो देयर इज अ Q&A बॉक्स, प्लीज पोस्ट योर क्वेश्चंस ओवर देयर. आई थिंक देयर इज वन क्वेश्चन ओवर देयर इन चैट बॉक्स. Sir, there is one question in chat box. So you are not positive in gold at all?
See, gold is a bit of a, that's a good question, because obviously being Indians, gold में काफी interest traditionally रहा है. But we think gold as an asset class is a bit of an expensive insurance policy. So in the sense that, meaning people look at gold as an insurance to the portfolio, right? If there is a lot of volatility, gold prices tend to go up. But our concern is that it doesn't generate any cash flow unless you're putting money in the sovereign gold bonds as such. There is very low or limited cash flow available with gold, and also we find it very difficult to value gold as an asset class. कि भाई उसका fair value क्या है? Because there is no underlying cash flow, it's very difficult to derive a fair value. And gold prices have already gone up; they are now close to their all-time highs. I think the all-time high for gold is about $2,000 odd, and it's thereabouts as such. So therefore, we are not, we don't have a very strong view on gold, is what I would say.
Right. Dilip ji, you can connect with Morningstar team. They will further assist you how to connect with them. We'll share the details with you soon, so you can look at the portfolios. And wait a minute, check box. Why you have increased allocation in long-term and medium-term debt funds, sir?
Yeah, that's again a very good question, right? Again, it is like लोग सोच रहे हैं कि भाई interest rates का जो scenario है, but if you look at the yield curve जो हम देखेंगे, I'll talk of some of that language because I feel most of you will be familiar with that. Yield curve का ये मतलब होता है कि what is across different maturity buckets, what is the return or the yield that you are getting for holding different maturity buckets, right? So आप एक साल का ट्रेजरी बिल देखेंगे आज की तारीख में इज अराउंड 4.5% or so. So it is yielding 4.5% roughly. If you look at the 10-year government security or anything above 5, 6, 7 years, the 10-year government security is yielding about 6.8 to 6.9%. Right? So the difference between the two, we call that as a term spread. कि आप 10 साल का पेपर होल्ड करने के लिए the additional yield that you are getting currently is about 2.2 to 2.3%. और अब historically ये difference क्या रहा है? If you look at historically, that difference has been between 100 to 150 basis points. Historically, between 1 year and 10 years, that difference has been about 100 to 150 basis points. Currently, it is at 220 basis points. So therefore, we think that the medium to long duration is looking attractive. Right? Tomorrow, even if interest rates go up, maybe the shorter end might go up a little bit more than the longer end also, might go up. It is already pricing in some of these concerns, right? Whether it is supply, whether it is inflation and all of that. Some of those concerns are being factored in, and but we feel that the yield curve will flatten. So इसलिए हमें ये लग रहा है कि the medium to long duration is looking attractive because the term spread is higher than normal. So इसलिए from a valuation standpoint it is looking attractive. If that is the reason why we have a higher allocation to slightly higher allocation to medium and long term.
Right. Raj Gopalan ji पूछ रहे हैं what is the return of our PMS? Sir, it was shared in that second last slide. But if you want,
so we can share it with you separately over the last.
Yes.
So but I can just tell you generally, since April 2019 when we launched the portfolios, so अभी 3 साल just अभी खत्म होने आया है. We will complete 3 years next month. From balanced to aggressive plus portfolio, the return has been in the range of about 11% going up to about 15% for the aggressive portfolio, aggressive plus portfolio. Balanced, of course, because it is a 50-50 portfolio, will be slightly lower. But importantly, the drawdowns have been lower. So, the downside risk here that has been lower than what markets have fallen, and the volatility has also been lower. So, we can separately address that question. Abhinav, if you can just make a note of the gentleman who was asking for this.
Yes, I have made.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fine. Sir, what's your view on allocation towards China?
Yeah. So of course it is a very tricky scenario, right? Of course, on the one hand, markets वहाँ पे correct हुए हैं, and valuations are looking attractive as we shown in some of our charts also earlier. Return expectations अभी improve हुए हैं. In fact, in our aggressive portfolio, a couple of months ago, we've added some separate exposure to China. So effectively, we think it is looking attractive. But yes, you cannot go overboard. So when we say attractive, we are not adding 10-15% allocation. It is a small allocation that we add. India, not only in India but global जो हमारे दूसरे strategies भी run होते हैं US में, Australia में वगैरह, वहाँ पे भी हमने allocations थोड़े China में add किए हैं. तो in short view ये है कि these big companies are not going to go away. Maybe the Chinese government is trying to regulate them a little better so that their growth is like they are talking of common prosperity और वो जो चीजें चाइना में बात कर रहे हैं अभी. So on that account they are trying to ensure that the companies also stay in line with their long-term goals. So therefore you are seeing some regulations, but all of these companies are homegrown. मतलब वो घर की companies है उनकी, बराबर है. Whether it is Alibaba, Tencent or DiDi, ये सब Chinese companies here, so they will not. The government themselves has boosted these companies. So we don't think they are going to go away. Therefore, we think China is looking reasonably attractive, but the allocation is cannot be substantial because उसमें risk भी है.
So, right. So sir, आपको क्या लग रहा है कि जिस तरह से इन्फ्लेशन बढ़ेगा तो जो फेड और आरबीआई का जो रेट हाइक है वो कंटिन्यूअस अभी थोड़े टाइम के लिए बढ़ता रहेगा? What do you think?
So there is an expectation for Federal. RBI ने तो अभी रेट हाइक का इंडिकेशन दिया ही नहीं है. इसलिए फरवरी में भी जो पॉलिसी इनफैक्ट वाज मोर डविश देन पीपल एक्सपेक्टेड. उन्होंने तो अपने इन्फ्लेशन के प्रोजेक्शंस कम किए हैं, एटलीस्ट एज ऑफ फरवरी, बिगिनिंग फरवरी, राइट. सो आरबीआई में नॉट इमीडिएटली एनीवेज गो फॉर रेट हाइक्स. दे विल कीप मॉनिटरिंग सिचुएशन बिकॉज उनको लग रहा है कि ग्रोथ अभी रिकवरी होने के लिए मतलब इट नीड्स सम मोर सपोर्ट. बट यूएस फेड की जो बात थी वहां पे वो लोग क्लियर इंडिकेशन दे रहे थे कि मार्च से वी विल स्टार्ट एंड दे मे स्टार्ट लिटिल अग्रेसिवली एज वेल. तो अभी जो इनिशियल इंडिकेशन था कि इस साल में यूएस में कम से कम 5 से 6 रेट हाइक होंगे. और जो पहला रेट हाइक होगा मार्च में वो 50 बेसिस पॉइंट का होगा। ये रशिया यूक्रेन क्राइसिस के पहले का व्यू था। तो अभी जाके देयर इज एन एक्सपेक्टेशन दैट इंस्टेड ऑफ डूइंग 50 बेसिस पॉइंट दे मे डू ओनली 25 बेसिस पॉइंट। द रीजन इज बिकॉज दे डोंट नो द इम्पैक्ट ऑन द इकोनॉमी, बिकॉज इतने सारे अभी यूएस यूरोप दे हैव ऑल saying they will stop import, they will stop trade relations with Russia. There are so many factors that are at play. So uski wajah se maybe US will increase rates, but they may do it a little bit more slowly or gradually. That is the view that is coming out right now.
राइट सर, विजय जी पूछ रहे हैं कि अपने पोर्टफोलियो में कैश का लेवल जनरली कितना रहता है? कैश का जनरली
हाँ, इट डिफर्स, क्योंकि अग्रेसिव जैसे पोर्टफोलियो होगा वहां से समझ लीजिए कैश, बिकॉज कैश भी है और डेट भी है हमारे पास, राइट? जैसे वी आल्सो लुक एट कि कौन सा कैश अट्रैक्टिव लग रहा है, मतलब लिक्विड अट्रैक्टिव लग रहा है या शॉर्ट टर्म, मीडियम टर्म, लॉन्ग टर्म डेट कौन से ज्यादा अट्रैक्टिव लग रहे हैं। सो इफ आई पुट डेट एंड कैश टुगेदर, नॉर्मली इट कैन बी इन द रेंज ऑफ आवर नॉर्मल एलोकेशन इज 10%, बट जैसे अभी मार्केट थोड़े एक्सपेंसिव अभी भी फिलहाल थोड़े लग रहे हैं तो उससे थोड़ा ज्यादा है। सो इट विल बी अराउंड 13 to 14% will be in debt and cash combined, but pure cash may be in the aggressive portfolio maybe about 2 to 3%, not more than that.
राइट। एंड सर एक फाइनल क्वेश्चन हम ले रहे हैं संजय जी का। वो पूछ रहे हैं कि सर जब इंडस्ट्री में बहुत सारे फंड, अभी करंट सिनेरियो की बात करें तो बहुत सारे ऐसे फंड आ रहे हैं जो अपना एलोकेशन यूएस फंड्स में, यूएस स्टॉक्स में डालते जा रहे हैं, एंड जो अपना व्यू है, मतलब मॉर्निंगस्टार का व्यू है, एंड यू आर सेइंग दैट यूएस लुकिंग लिटिल बिट एक्सपेंसिव।
बराबर है।
सो क्या कहेंगे सर इसके बारे में?
बिल्कुल। सी, देयर आर टू थिंग्स, ऑफ कोर्स इफ यू लुक एट जो ट्रेंड्स है, प्रोडक्ट लॉन्चेस की जो ट्रेंड होती है, जैसे आप 2020 में देयर वर हार्डली एनी आईपीओज और देयर वर हार्डली एनी न्यू फंड्स दैट वर लॉन्च्ड, राइट? व्हेन वी सी नॉर्मली द ट्रेंड दैट इज फॉलोड फॉर आईपीओज एंड न्यू प्रोडक्ट लॉन्चेस इज दैट जो अभी अच्छा चल रहा है, वेयर दे कैन शो वेरी स्ट्रांग हिस्ट्री ऑफ परफॉर्मेंस, दे टेंड टू लॉन्च दोस काइंड ऑफ प्रोडक्ट्स। बट as an advisor and we as a portfolio manager, we try to assess that is this market or asset class looking attractive from a forward looking perspective. जैसे यूएस इक्विटीज में पिछले 6-7 हमने वो जो हीट मैप वाली स्लाइड भी देखी, 2008 से लेके 2022 तक यूएस इक्विटीज हैव जनरेटेड a CAGR of more than 15%, which has been the highest. So keeping all of those factors into account, we think US equities are looking expensive. जो valuations है, particularly जो टेक्नोलॉजी कंपनीज है जिसमें काफी सारी बातें होती है, फैंग स्टॉक्स जो है फेसबुक, एप्पल, अमेज़न वगैरह, तो दोज आई थिंक वी थिंक आर स्टिल इवन मोर एक्सपेंसिव देन द ओवरऑल यूएस इक्विटी मार्केट। सो वी आर एटलीस्ट लिटिल मोर कंजर्वेटिव ऑन दैट फ्रंट। ऑफ कोर्स पिछले 2-3 महीने से थोड़ा करेक्शन आया है तो ओवर वैल्यूएशन कम हुआ है, बट दे आर स्टिल नॉट लुकिंग चीप और अट्रैक्टिव। दैट इज आवर व्यू ऑन दैट।
राइट सर, वी आर टेकिंग 1 or 2 more questions as it is coming over there. सर 10-15 सालों के होराइजन में क्या मल्टी एसेट्स फंड और जो लार्ज के अपने इक्विटी फंड्स हैं वो का मतलब स्टैंडर्ड डिविएशन जिसका कम है वो इक्वल रहेंगे या क्या व्यू रहेगा उसके ऊपर?
स्टैंडर्ड वोलेटिलिटी तो मल्टी एसेट में कम होनी चाहिए, मतलब बिकॉज दैट इज द मेन, मतलब जो उसका जो ऑब्जेक्टिव है इज टू जनरेट बेटर रिस्क एडजस्टेड रिटर्न्स। तो वोलेटिलिटी मल्टी एसेट में तो कम होनी चाहिए। और दूसरी बात यह है कि जब हम इक्विटी फंड्स की भी बात करते हैं, इट इज ट्रेडिशनली इंडिया में ज्यादा करके पैसा जो गया है वो इंडियन इक्विटीज में ही गया है, लेकिन हमने पिछले कुछ स्लाइड्स में भी देखा कि दूसरे मार्केट्स में भी परफॉर्मेंस फ्रॉम टाइम टू टाइम अच्छा रहा है। सो देयरफॉर इट इज इंपॉर्टेंट टू आल्सो डाइवर्सिफाई द इक्विटी पोर्टफोलियो एंड इंक्लूड अदर ज्योग्राफीज इन द पोर्टफोलियो। बट मैं इन्वेस्टर के हिसाब से सोचूं, if I think from because you and I, both of us are existing from because the investor is there, right? So we are here to serve the investor. तो investor के हिसाब से मैं सोचूं तो उनके जो long term goals होते हैं, normally they will have investments into equity, into debt, into other asset classes, gold, real estate वगैरह सब में investments रहेंगे। तो effectively उनका multi asset portfolio तो रहता ही है। किसी का कम ज्यादा इक्विटी में कम ज्यादा होगा थोड़ा, depending on age, risk appetite वगैरह। But I would think multi asset is really at the core of anyways, and most investors will require a multi-asset solution, is what I would think. आप mute पे है मिलिंद भाई, I think you've gone on mute पे।
Oh, sorry. So we have missed 1 or 2 questions, but we are running over a time. So Dhaval ji, thank you very much for your great insights And friends, if you have anything to know more about Morningstar PML managed portfolios, please get back to the team, or you can connect with me as well. We'll share their details. So
sure.
Thank you,
One thing, if I
Dhaval.
can just, I can just quickly add, Abhinav, if you can just make a note of the questions that were not answered, we can respond to them, with Milind bhai's permission later on as well on email.
Sir, almost there are some similar questions, but I have tried to capture all the questions.
Okay, perfect.
Right,
perfect.
but फिर भी देख लेंगे.
I have made a note of it.
Yes.
Okay.
So thank you, Dhaval bhai, and entire team of Morningstar. Thank you, Abhinav, and thank you, Dhaval sir. Thank you,
Thank you,
and thank you all the participants. Thanks a lot.
Yes, thank you everyone. Goodbye.